All right. It tells me I'm live after dealing with encoders. I tried to get into the actual stream that I had set up and scheduled, but for whatever reason, it wouldn't let me do that. So I started from scratch, and here we are. Let me get that light now. There we go. That's a little bit better in the lighting. Sorry about that. If anyone is watching, which I don't see that I have any viewers, but if anybody is, would you mind hopping on chat and letting me know if you can hear this all right, if the video is coming out right? I'm going to assume that it is, and I'm just going to start yapping. We'll see how it goes. So what did I want to talk about tonight? This is going to be, like the title says, the importance of auditing our beliefs. Now, I was initially going to talk about and have the title the value or the importance of auditing our faith. But I decided to go with beliefs, in part because I saw a video today. I'm planning to do this for a little bit. I just didn't know if I want to do a write up or if I want to do another audio recording or wait till I was able to do video like tonight. But I saw a video today with the kids, and it's Timothy Mahoney. He's the guy that did Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus. This was his second movie in that series, Patterns of Evidence, the Moses controversy. And basically, he was dealing with, did Moses actually write the Torah? And if so, or if not, what does that do for our belief in the Bible as a whole and the God of Israel in general? Because we get our belief in Yahweh and the God of Israel because of what we read in the Bible. And it starts off with the writings of Moses, those first 5 books, the Pentateuch, the Torah. And so if the mainstream scholars are correct, and those books were not actually written by him, and they are actually the result of oral tradition passed down by several generations, then we can't consider them to be reliable. And therefore, why are we basing our belief in a God, Yahweh, on these texts? And so it's interesting timing to me that I came across that video now as I was thinking about talking about this. And if anybody has watched my posts on YouTube, if anybody's heard me speak like in home fellowships or just one-on-one chats, this is a subject that for me is just the springboard for everything. Because if we don't know why we believe what we believe, then we're in deep trouble. Because if somebody comes to us and asks us to explain ourselves, all we're going to be able to give is just rote tradition. We're just going to be able to give, well, this is the way I was raised. These are my beliefs that I was given by my parents, my grandparents, however, and that's just not good enough. So that's what I want to take a look at now is why do we believe what we believe? Let's audit our beliefs, okay? So what is a belief? Obviously, a belief is something that uh, we have a notion in our mind that is accurate. It's true. So I believe the earth is a globe. Now, the internet is telling me lately that the world is flat, but I believe it's a globe. So that's a belief. I believe that Yahweh is the creator of the universe. That's a belief. I believe that I started going bald when I was in junior high. That's a fact, but it's also a belief. I believe it. And you could go on and on and on. Okay, there's things we believe. There's things that we consider to be truth, but the fact that it's a belief doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. Case in point, we look at Darwinism. Okay, we basically have, I was going to say 2 sides, but we basically have 3 different opinions on that. We have the mainstream opinion that we're taught by scientists, that's being pushed in our schools, that evolution is the way it happened, that we had the primordial soup, microbes came first, and then they evolved into higher life forms. on up the ladder, dinosaurs, birds, monkeys turned into humans, different things like that, and that's the mainstream view. You have the creationist view, which is generally what we see among evangelicals and such, and that's that evolution is a bunch of just bogusness, fooey, and it's nonsense. We have the 6 days of creation in Genesis. Everything was created species by species, exactly the way it is now. There was no change. And we kind of have a third view, and I might get myself into trouble by saying this, but this is what I ascribe to, somewhere in the middle, because there is evidence for what I consider microevolution as opposed to macroevolution. Basically, adaptation. A species can kind of be modified over time by basically modification of the gene pool. Um, so we're talking minor changes. It's still the same basic species. We're not talking about monkeys turning into humans, or I believe with whales, they believe that that was some kind of an ancient horse or something, if I remember correctly, like a pygmy type horse that somehow evolved into a whale. I could be wrong on that, but it seems like I remember reading that somewhere. I don't believe in that. But I mean, we have ample evidence of animals changing slightly, just to kind of adapt to their surroundings. And I can totally see that, because just logic tells me that every single species on Earth now, either by twos or in sevens, as it mentions in the Bible with the account of the flood and Noah, there is no possible way Noah could have gotten all of those animals on the ark. So it makes sense to me that he would have had a smaller number of species to work with to get on the ark, and then over the time, those species have changed by fluctuations, mutations in their gene pool. Um, a dog is a dog, but how many different breeds of dogs are there? They're all dogs. Humans are humans. We're all basically the same, but we have different traits. We have different bone structure, different skin color, different hair colors, different height, build, all these different things. We're still humans. We're still the same species. So to me, that's where I'm at. But that's a rabbit trail. Um, but my point is that these are beliefs. Okay, the simple fact that we believe something does not make it truth. So we as believers in the Bible and who we perceive to be the writer of the Bible, Yahweh or God, um, that's our belief. But our belief in that is not enough to make it true. And that might sound a little bit controversial to you, but that's how it is. It's just the nature of it. And so I want to take a look at that tonight. Basically, what I came to see several years ago is, I'll give an example. Okay, I was born and raised in the Church of Christ. This is not going to be a pick on Church of Christ session. I love the Church of Christ. I'm not going to bash them. Um, but basically, the history is it's basically the result of the Stone Campbell movement in the 1800s, what people sometimes call the Second Enlightenment. And long story short, it kind of morphed into two different styles. There's a more conservative branch, which I came from, and there's a more liberal branch. And the conservative branch teaches that you are not allowed to have musical instruments of any kind in worship. It's strictly a cappella singing. That's a belief. Okay. But I came to see, when I read my whole Bible cover to cover, that David was praising Yahweh with a harp and his voice, that he commissioned Levites as singers and musicians with harps, with trumpets, with loud crashing cymbals to praise the Almighty. And the belief among Church of Christ and maybe some other denominations, I don't know if this is widespread or not, is that because we don't see mention of anyone in the New Testament worshiping or praising with musical instruments, they're singing hymns, they're singing spiritual songs, but there's no mention of any instruments. Therefore, we are not to use musical instruments in worship. So the question for me is, okay, I believed that for a long time growing up. But as an adult, reading the Bible cover to cover, I became to see that that belief was not accurate. Okay. So why did I believe that in the first place? And it's just because I was told that that was the truth. And it's my belief that for most of us, that is true across the board for our theology. We believe what we were taught growing up, and we don't question it generally. There are people that do, but generally, if you're born a Baptist, you raise your kids as a Baptist. If you're born a Catholic, you raise your kids as Catholic. If you're born an Episcopal, you raise your kids Episcopal, et cetera, on down the line. That's just how it is. And so, the simple fact that you are born and raised in a specific flavor of Christianity or Judaism or any other religion for that matter does not mean that it's the ultimate truth. Okay. So this is where I get to the whole concept of auditing our faith. What is an audit? What is an audit? Okay. So I use the word audit. An audit is where I come from a corporate customer service type background generally. And all the companies I've worked for have been like ISO certified. Okay. International Standards Organization, I think is what it means. And basically, to become ISO certified, ISO sends auditors into your company and they do lots of stuff. They look at the paperwork, they look at the files, the records. But one of the things that they also do is sometimes they will sit down with an employee of the company and they will say, okay, show me what you do. What are you doing? Okay. Employee says, well, I'm making a widget. Okay. So the auditor says, okay, can you show me how to make the widget? So the employee starts to make the widget and the auditor says, okay, now show me, how do you know how to make that widget? The employee says, well, I was trained. I just know how to do it. This is how we do it. The auditor says, okay, how do I know if I want to make this widget, how do I know how to make it? Employee says, well, will you look at the procedure? Okay, the auditor says, can you show me the procedure, please? Um, yeah, I don't really know where the procedure is. I just, this is how we do it. This is how I make the widget. At that point, the auditor is going to assess a finding because in order to be ISO certified, you have to have a standard operating procedure. You have to have a written procedure that every employee can refer to when they make the widget or when they perform the service, when they perform the debt collection or the claims processing or whatever it is you're doing. If you don't have a written procedure that you can go to that spells out line by line what you're supposed to do, the auditor's not going to be happy. Because without a written instruction for every single employee to go off of, there's room for human error because people forget, people misunderstand. And because of those two things, you're going to have widgets that are going to hit the quality control and they're not going to conform to company standards. If everyone is working off the same standard operating procedure, those widgets are all going to be identical and they're all going to pass QC with flying colors. That's the point of an auditor. So when I talk about auditing our beliefs, I mean looking at them like that. Like, can we show in writing why we have our beliefs? Do we have a standard operating procedure that we can go by and show line by line why we do what we do and why we believe what we believe? And it's my position that for most of us, maybe to some extent, we can kind of do that, but we can't do it for all of our beliefs. Okay. And if we're honest with ourselves, this is largely because we're just products of our culture. Okay. If you're watching this live stream, you can clearly see that I'm a Caucasian male, okay, of European descent, light skinned, red hair. I've got a lot of Scottish in me, some English. I thought I had some Nordic in me, but Ancestry.com says no. Okay, that's cool. I'm not a Viking. Anyway, what that tells me is that my ancestors, by and large, were Christians. Okay, because Christianity is the dominant religion over the past couple thousand years, give or take, on the European continent, and by proxy, any of the nations that are offshoots of that. So, like the European, not the European, the British colonies, the French colonies, Portuguese colonies, Spanish colonies, anything like that, are going to have a Christian religion. Okay. So, my parents were Christian, their parents were Christian, their parents were Christian, on back down the line. So, if I were born, let's say in uh, Shanghai, okay, let's say I was born in Shanghai, China. I would not look like I do now, most likely, and that's okay. But culturally, I would probably not be a Christian right now. I would probably be, considering that it's communist China, I would probably be either atheistic or I might be some form of Buddhist, Taoist, maybe some type of Eastern religion, depending on what's there in the area, what I picked up on through my ancestry. But I would most likely not be a Christian. Okay. So let's say I am born in Shanghai, and let's say hypothetically I am a Buddhist. My worldview at that point is that Buddhism is the truth. Okay. The Buddha was the first enlightened person, and he passed down his wisdom to us. And that's the basis of my faith. My faith at that point thinks that Christianity is just not accurate. Okay. Hinduism is not accurate. Islam is not accurate. Name any other religion on the planet, and it's just not the truth. Okay. And I can put myself in the shoes of a person born in Pakistan. Most likely, I would be raised as a Muslim. Okay. If I'm born in Russia, okay, chances are I was born and raised in a Russian Orthodox family. If I'm born in Greece, maybe a Greek Orthodox family. And you can keep doing this on down the line, no matter what region you're born in, you're probably going to be the majority religion in that area. Now, all of these religions cannot be 100% truth. If they were, we would only have one religion. So each of these religions, just logically, has something that is not correct. So just the sheer fact that we are born into a culture that is predominantly a certain religious belief does not make that belief true. Okay. The fact that I was born into a Christian culture does not make Christianity true. Okay. Now, I want to stop and do a disclaimer right here. I do believe that there is a lot of truth in Christianity. I'm not against Christianity wholesale. Okay. I know that sometimes in my posts on Facebook, I do take a little bit of a position against certain tenets of Christianity, but I'm not against the whole thing. Okay. I would want to make that crystal clear. Okay. I was born and raised a Christian. I still believe that Christ, Yahshua, or as most people call him, Jesus, I believe 100% that he is the only begotten Son of Yahweh, that he is our Redeemer, that he died so that I could live. I believe that 100%. Okay. So just because I made the choice to keep the Torah does not mean that I have thrown out every single thing I ever learned in Christianity. I just want to say that right now. Okay. So moving forward, okay, because I was born into this Christian culture, and the timing is just interesting because I've been wanting to talk about this for about a week or two. and I posted a video on my Facebook of a couple guys, I forget their names, Canadian guys, and they were talking about how basically the internet is the catalyst for the new, like the second Reformation. Okay, so we know that the first Reformation, starting Martin Luther, John Calvin, that time frame, was successful mostly because of the technology of the printing press. They were able to print out Bibles in the native languages of the different countries and different tracts, pamphlets, and whatnot, and get those out there to the people to read in their own native tongue faster than the Catholic Church could counter. So it's kind of like that now with the internet. I mean, here I am. I'm live streaming on YouTube with no gatekeeper. There's nobody that can say, James, you're not authorized, you're not sanctioned, you don't have the credentials, sit down and shut up. So here I am, live streaming on Facebook. Anybody in the world can watch this and hear what I have to say. And it's like that for anybody. Anybody with the technology, which is readily available for most of us in Western civilization, can hop on and do this. So that's their point, is that this allows us to get the word out without a gatekeeper. And because we're doing that, we have the potential to break free of all of the barriers that have been put upon us just by our culture. Okay. And the one guy mentioned a family who I'm probably gonna botch the details a little bit, so forgive me. But I watched the video. Okay, it's on my Facebook. You can look it up on YouTube. It's something like how the internet provoked the Second Reformation or something like that. And these two guys are talking about this family that they know that were raised Southern Baptist. Okay, they were raising their kids Southern Baptist. They went over to Spain on a mission trip. When they got over there, pretty much everybody's drinking alcohol with their meals, like it's no big deal, and doing a bunch of other stuff. And they're looking around being like, wait a minute, we were told that all this stuff was sinful. But yet, here's all these people that identify as Christians who are doing it like it's no big deal. And they became aware of the fact that there in Spain, there were no Southern Baptist churches for them to go to. So they basically had no Southern Baptist support network over there. It was basically just them. They might have had a few contacts from like an organization that arranged a mission trip or something like that. But in their general day-to-day dealings, it wasn't like back in the States where they had a whole group of other Southern Baptists around them who believed the same thing. And so they had to grapple with the question of, are these people sinning? Are they going to hell because they're doing things differently than we were taught is acceptable? And they came to the conclusion that it's a cultural thing. Okay. The people in Spain, their culture allowed them to drink alcohol with their meals. It was a culturally accepted norm. In the circles that these people ran with back in the States, the Southern Baptist circles, it was shunned. It was frowned upon and shunned. You just don't drink. Okay. I've never known a Southern Baptist who drinks beer or liquor or wine even that I know of, unless they just did it behind the scenes and I had no idea. But it's not an accepted practice, as far as I know, among Southern Baptists to drink alcohol. And so these people kind of had an awakening where they said, well, how much of what we believe is a product of our cultural upbringing, and how much of it is actually truth from the Bible? And so they had to actually do an audit of their beliefs, and they had to figure out, why they actually believed some of the things they believed, why some of the doctrine that they suppose was true. I mean, is it truth or is it just a cultural expectation? Like the music in church, I came to believe that that was not a biblically accurate teaching. But when you're surrounded by other people who believe the same thing, you get a normalcy bias, you get a confirmation bias where everybody tells you that you're doing the right thing and you're correct and you believe it because there are no opposing voices. There are no opposing views to tell you that you're incorrect. So you assume that you are correct. And that's how we function as human beings. It's like that anywhere. To go back to Shanghai, if I'm born and raised as a Buddhist in a place where there are no Christians, or in China where the Christians are persecuted and marginalized, there's nobody around in my circles to tell me that I'm wrong. Anybody in my circles is going to tell me that either Buddhism is correct or maybe that atheism is correct. And as far as I know, they don't crack down as hard on Buddhists as they do on Christians over there. Um, but either way, my circle of influence, my friends, my family, they're not going to tell me that I'm wrong. I'm not going to have people sitting at dinner with me telling me that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. It's just not going to happen. I'm not going to have people, John 3, 6, 16ing me. It's not going to happen because it's not culturally where I'm at. And so we as Americans or Europeans, and when I say Americans, I'm saying Americans because we are kind of the melting pot. People of African descent, people of Hispanic descent, Asian descent, whatever the case may be. If you're a believer that Yahshua, Jesus, is the Messiah, okay, you're basically a Christian, okay, regardless of your race, regardless of your ancient cultural beginnings, okay, or ethnic beginnings, okay. You're an American and you're a Christian, okay. So you're at that point your race is irrelevant, okay. So I'm not talking about it from like an ethnic or a racial perspective. I'm talking about it from a cultural perspective, okay. So I want to make that clear. We as Americans, America is a Christian nation, regardless of what we're told. The majority of Americans still, even today, identify as Christians of some sort. Okay. And I know that there are some that might watch this that say, well, I don't identify as Christian. I'm a Messianic. I'm a Hebrew roots. I'm a sacred name or whatever. We are basically a sect of Christianity. Just like when we go back to Yahshua's time, the way, the sect of the Nazarenes, was considered by the general public to be a sect or a branch of Judaism. They weren't considered to be some completely different religion. It was just a different flavor of Judaism. And we're like that now. We're basically, as far as the world sees us, a different flavor of Christianity. Okay. That's why I'm not, contrary to what you might read into my posts, I'm not 100% against Christianity. Okay. I'm like Yahshua, where he's talking about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and he's correcting their doctrine. He's not saying that they're 100% wrong. He's not saying that they're totally off base. He's finding where they're off and he's making the corrections. Okay. And so that's my approach is, let's make those corrections based on the word. Let's identify where we're off and acknowledge that and make those corrections as necessary. Okay. So to get back to culture, okay. If Okay, I was raised Church of Christ. I'll just use myself as an example here, okay? My parents were both members of the Church of Christ, okay? The denomination, okay? Now, my mother was born and raised in it. Her parents, my grandparents, were a member of that church growing up, and so she was born and raised in it. My father was raised in the Assembly of God. He was raised as a Pentecostal. Now, anybody that knows the dynamic in the Church of Christ knows that they're not really keen on Pentecostal doctrine. The speaking in tongues, all that stuff, it's just not really floating their boat, so to speak. Okay. So my father was raised in that. My great grandfather was just a titan of the Assembly of God church in the Panhandle of Texas. He started so many churches in the area. He made the rounds and he just seeded all these congregations. And I think he became a regional director or something. He was very on fire for that particular denomination. And my dad was raised in that. When my dad married my mother, I don't remember the exact timing. I've been told, but I'm rusty on it. He basically decided to convert over to the Church of Christ. Okay. So, as a critical thinker, thinking through this, and this can be anybody, this happens all the time. People of different denominations, different congregations, different churches marry each other, and they have to make a choice. Are we going to be a two church house? Are we going to go to Assembly of God Church on one Sunday and then go to Church of Christ on the next Sunday? Are we going to pick one and just unite behind it and go with that one? How are we going to do this? Okay. It's common. It happens all the time. We have Jewish people marrying into Christian families and Christian families marrying into Jewish families. I mean, this is not rare. Okay. So I'm not picking on my parents. I'm just using this as an example. Okay. So the question becomes, my father was raised in the Assembly of God, believing that that was the truth. When he married my mother and converted over to Church of Christ, does that all of a sudden make his beliefs from the Assembly of God invalid? Did the truth change because he met and married my mother? Okay. I know a woman, to name another example, who was born and raised a Christian. I forget the denomination. Found out late in life that she had Jewish ancestry and converted to Judaism. Okay, and to convert to Judaism, you have to deny that Jesus Christ or Yahshua is the Messiah. You have to deny that. The Jews will not let you convert to Judaism if you accept him as the Messiah. So the fact that she was able to convert to Judaism means that that's what she did. Okay. So because she found out that she had Jewish DNA, all of a sudden in her mind, there is no Messiah. Jesus is not the Messiah. Yahshua is not the Messiah. Just because of her DNA. Okay. The truth changed. Her paradigm changed because of her DNA. Okay. So it's my position that truth is absolute. There is an absolute truth out there. Okay. It's not moral relativism. It's not this postmodern concept of there is no right and wrong. It's just our own perspectives and our own life experiences that determine what is right and wrong to us, our paradigm. I don't believe that. I believe there is 100% black and white, right and wrong. Okay. And it's my position that we have our concept of that blurred by our cultural upbringing. Okay. So, and to go back to my life, okay, because I can only speak for myself. I know my own experience, okay. Being raised in the Church of Christ, being taught things like predestination, preterism from an eschatological perspective, being taught a very conservative stance on music and worship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When I hit my early adult years and started to see that there were some things that were kind of off, I didn't really kind of know specifically what they were, but I just kind of started to get the idea something's not quite right here. There's something off, okay? And so anybody that knows me, knows my story, knows that I went through kind of a little a new age phase in my early 20s, my late teens, early 20s, where I was dabbling in like Zen Buddhism, Eastern kind of stuff. I was trying to recharge my chakras. I was trying to astrally relocate, these kinds of things. And this was, and I see this now, hindsight being 2020, that this was just a response to me seeing that there was something missing in my worship in the Church of Christ. And I was looking to see what it was. I was exploring, okay, like people do. And I didn't find the truth there because it's not there. But it prompted me to read my Bible cover to cover and see, what does it say I'm going to read the words and I'm going to believe what they say and do what they say, regardless of what I have been told growing up. Okay. And so I did that, and I did it with a King James Bible. So it can be done in the KJV. Okay. I had an old orange bonded leather KJV. I don't know where it is. It disappeared over the years. I wish I still had it. But anyway, so cover to cover. And I saw that Yahweh instituted the Sabbath as holy, the seventh day at creation in Genesis chapter 1. And when he told his people Israel at Mount Sinai to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, okay, that's the only commandment out of the 10 commandments that he specifically said to remember. That made an impression on me. This is important to him. He wants us to remember it. And then I read about it being his sign to his people. And I read about it being perpetual and for all generations. And then I get into the New Testament and I see Joshua keeping the Sabbath. I see Paul keeping the Sabbath. Okay. That was a game changer. And so anything I read in the Bible at this point is, if it conflicts with what I've been taught, that's okay, because I'm just going to go with the truth. And pretty much everybody I've talked to, down to the person over the years, that has decided to do Torah in addition, not in replacement of, but in addition to their faith in Messiah, has done the same thing. Something was off in the church. Something, they started off, maybe it was something specific, maybe it was something vague, but something was off about church, and they couldn't quite deal with it. So they went into the word to find out what it was. And they came to the same general conclusion that I and hundreds of thousands of others around the world have come to, that it's law and grace, not law or grace. Okay? That we are expected as believers in Yahshua as the Messiah, and by extension as Yahweh as the God of Israel, his father, to keep his father's commandments, which are his commandments. So it's not like we just woke up one day and said, I think I want to be Jewish and do this Jewish stuff. That's not how it worked, at least not for most of us, okay? Most of us came to this conclusion, the vast majority of us came to this conclusion because we were willing to examine ourselves against the word of Yahweh and see where our beliefs were in alignment and where they fell short, okay? And this is something that Paul talks about. And I've been accused of Paul bashing. I've been accused of disapproving Paul, and et cetera, et cetera. So I don't. I don't. I like Paul. Okay. I'm going to read a scripture that he wrote that's going to go along with this. And I hope that this is one that you've heard before. And this is basically my motto when it comes to examining the word. All right. So I'm going to go to 2 Corinthians chapter 13, starting in verse 5. All right. Test yourselves to see if you are in the faith. Okay. Examine yourselves. Or do you not recognize this about yourselves, that Yahshua the Messiah is in you, unless indeed you fail the test? Okay. So what are we examining? What is Paul admonishing us to examine? He's admonishing us to examine ourselves, our faith. Okay. He's not admonishing us to examine the other guy over there and see if he's wrong. He's just completely off base. That guy over there is wackadoodle. No, he's admonishing us here to examine ourselves, to test ourselves. Okay. And the thing that I've seen over the years is that most people who identify as Christians are not willing to do that. Okay. It's the truth. It's the truth. Most people who identify as Christians are they're Christians in general, or they identify with a specific denomination for a few basic reasons. And I've identified these before, but I'll rehash it here. A, like me, you're born into it. Your parents were in that faith, and so they taught it to you, and so you believe it and you pass it down to your kids. Okay, that's one. B, like my father, you married into it. Okay, and so you converted to your spouse's beliefs. Okay, like I said, that's common. That's widespread. Okay, I used to work with a woman who was Jewish. She married a Catholic, and I don't think they had kids, so I don't know that they had to work out how are we going to teach the kids. But if you have kids, that's a real thing. Like, are we going to teach them Catholicism? Are we going to teach them Judaism? Are we just going to leave the whole thing just open and let them decide for themselves? But if they decide for themselves, where are they getting the information? Are they going online and looking around, or are they talking to grandma? I mean, like, how's this going to work? Okay. So the other thing is, it's like you see these old movies, okay, like Little House on the Prairie, you know what I mean, old westerns, right? You have these little small towns, and they always have this little white church, okay, that everybody in town goes to. They have a pastor, they have a reverend, maybe a priest, but it's usually a reverend, usually some type of Protestant persuasion, and that's where everybody goes. It's the only church in the area, okay? So you're out there like Paul Ingalls. You're just working yourself to the bone at the sawmill or whatever job you can find to do to provide for your family. You don't have time back then to sit and actually study the Bible, to really dig in. And you don't have the resources. You don't have Strong's Concordance. You don't have the internet. You don't have all the different lexicons and things like that. You don't have the Dead Sea Scrolls. You don't have the Septuagint. All you have is a King James Bible and no time to study it. So what are you going to do? You're going to go to the only church in town, and you're going to believe what the pastor tells you because he's an expert. He has time to study. That's his job. Okay. You're trusting that pastor or that reverend to distill the truth down to you and hope that he's right. Okay. So that's another option. The fourth option, as I see it, is you came to that denomination or that church congregation because you studied your way into it. This has happened before. I know of one prominent example, Professor Walter Veith. If you go online, like YouTube, and you look up Amazing Discoveries, he's a Seventh day Adventist pastor professor. Okay. He used to be a professor of zoology in South Africa. He was born and raised as a Catholic. And somewhere growing up as a teenager or something, a Protestant told him that his mother was going to burn in hell because she was a Catholic. And of course, he's thinking, like, well, if this is Christianity, or this one guy is saying that my mom is going to burn in hell because she has a different belief system than he does, I don't want anything to do with this. And so he became an atheist. Okay. And years later, I forget how he did it, but somehow or other, he came back to Catholicism. And he did that for a little bit, and he was like, this is just not quite right. It's just not quite right. He did the whole Bible study thing, and he saw the Sabbath, and so he ended up being a Seventh day Adventist, and he still is. But which I don't agree with all of Seventh day Adventism. I do not believe in the writings of Ellen White. I don't go there. It's great that they're keeping the Sabbath holy, the seventh day Sabbath. But anyway, so that's his walk. Okay, so he studied his way into Seventh day Adventism. He was not raised SDA. He was raised Catholic, and then he became atheist. Okay, but people like that are the exception to the rule. Okay, almost everyone out there who is I'm just going to use the umbrella term Hebrew roots. Okay, the way I define that, I subcategories of sacred name movement, Messianic Judaism. I can't think of any others, but they're basically kind of all the same. Basically, people who believe that Yahshua or Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, the Son of Yahweh, and they believe in keeping the Torah, the law, the commandments in some capacity. Okay, that's a general what I'm talking about. People that do that, most of them studied themselves into it. They weren't born into it. They didn't marry into it. And it certainly wasn't the only church in town. Okay. So we're doing this because we actually decided to examine and test our beliefs. Okay. Because to go back to the movie I watched today, okay, Patterns of Exodus, the Moses controversy. Okay. The director and writer, Timothy Mahoney, he mentioned this in his first movie he did, Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus. Basically, he kind of had a crisis of faith. Like, why do I believe this? And he mentioned it in the current movie, the Moses controversy. He was raised by Christian parents. His mother was very devout. His parents divorced, so he was raised by a single mom. His mother was very devout. But as he grew older, he started to wonder, like, why? Why am I doing this? Am I doing this just because my mom taught me this and her mom taught her this, or dad, or whatever? Like, so he began to kind of to look for proof. Okay. And he found proof in the first movie, the Exodus, of the Exodus. Okay. So in the second movie, he goes looking for proof that Moses actually wrote the Pentateuch, or the Torah. Okay. Because that's foundational. If Moses didn't write the Torah, if he didn't write those first 5 books, or at least in some way contributed to them, the whole house of cards falls. Okay. Because what does Joshua say? If you believed the words of Moses, you would believe me. So if Moses' words are not true, and they're not really even Moses's, why on earth will we believe Joshua? Because his whole ministry is based on the Torah. Now, that might sound shocking to you, but at no point in his ministry did he ever denounce the Torah, the legitimate Torah that was given to Moses at Mount Sinai. He did denounce the man-made traditions that were given by the Pharisees and Sadducees. On top of that, going out and picking grain on Sabbath, that's not a violation of Torah. You read anywhere in the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the Torah, you will not find a single commandment in there that says you can't do that. That was a man-made tradition that was being put on the people. That's the kind of thing he was speaking out about, against, not the actual legitimate Torah. Okay? Because if you actually look, and I'm going to sidestep a little bit here, sidebar a little bit here, but if you go into Stephen's testimony when Stephen was martyred, Stephen makes it clear that it was the angel of Yahweh who spoke to Moses in the burning bush. He makes it clear that it was the angel, the messenger of Yahweh, who spoke to Moses in the wilderness. Okay? He doesn't say Yahweh himself. So if you believe that Stephen was full of the Holy Spirit like it says he was, then you have to believe that what he said was true. Okay? And if you go back and you read what Yahweh says, he talks about, I'm going to send my angel before you. And I'm paraphrasing here. This is basically the pillar of fire, the pillar of cloud. Okay, this is the angel of Yahweh that goes and leads the people and fights for them. Okay, and he talks about he will not pardon your transgressions or forgive your sins. Okay, now you go back to the New Testament where the Pharisees are questioning Yahshua. Well, who is this guy to forgive sins? Okay, he's the angel of Yahweh. He's the messenger of Yahweh that went before them in the wilderness. He's the one that spoke to Moses, because what does it say? He says, no one has heard or seen the Father except for the Son. So who did Moses see? Who did Abraham see when it says that Yahweh came to Abraham at the oaks of Mamre? Who did he sit and eat with? It says it was Yahweh. But yet Yahshua says, no one has seen or heard the Father except for the Son. So who did Moses hear at the burning bush? Who did the people hear speaking down in thunder from Mount Sinai? I mean, this is the messenger of Yahweh. This is the angel of Yahweh. This is Yahshua speaking to the people, okay? So if you follow that logic out, who spoke the commandments to Moses and told him to write them down? It had to have been Yahshua. It had to have been Jesus. Okay? So when he says, if you love me, keep my commandments, that's what he's talking about. He's not talking about a few commandments that Paul specifies in his letters. He's not talking about, I can't think of anything specifically, a red letter offhand, but he's not talking about anything specified like verbatim in the New Testament. He's talking about the commandments that he gave at Sinai to the people. Okay? Now, I realize that that's a hard pill to swallow for many, but it's the truth. Okay? And the only reason I accept that as truth is because I was willing to test my beliefs against the word here, against these words in this Bible. I was willing to look and see, where am I right and where am I wrong? Where have I fallen victim to cultural upbringing and cultural expectations? Okay. So I'm encouraging you to not settle for what you were raised in, to not settle for what you were taught. There are going to be elements of what you were taught that most likely are correct. I doubt if you were taught complete lies. Okay, if you're a Christian of any form, there's a percentage of truth in your beliefs. Okay, I'm not going to tear down everything you believe in. I have no interest in doing that. My purpose, my calling, is to do what I can to help bring us back on the straight path. Okay, to just like Joshua did. Okay, he's our example. We're supposed to be like him. He was clarifying the Torah. He never once said, and here's another sidebar. Okay, Joshua had anywhere between 70 weeks and maybe 3.5 years, depending on how you reckon the length of his earthly ministry. Okay, all that time, he could have said, guys, here's what's going to happen. Okay, I'm going to die. And the moment I die, you can stop keeping Torah. Okay, it's no longer going to apply to you. It's irrelevant. I'm paying the debt. I'm fulfilling the law, and I'm abolishing it at that point. Okay, never happened. You can read all 4 Gospels. You won't find that anywhere. Okay, you go on to the book of Acts. Okay, Peter's first several sermons. Okay, he has ample opportunity to say, hey guys, Yahshua died, so now you don't have to keep the Torah, the commandments, the law. Did he? No, he didn't. Okay. Stephen, okay, when he's being examined by the priests, gives this epic dissertation on the history of Israel and ultimately ends up condemning the priesthood for their hypocrisy. He has ample opportunity to say, you guys are insisting that the people keep the Torah, but because Jesus died, we don't have to. Did he? No. And in fact, the false witnesses that were put forth to testify against him said that he was teaching, that Yahshua, Jesus, was teaching against the laws and the customs of Moses. The customs of Moses, that's the Torah. Okay? Moses is the one the conduit who provided the Torah from Yahweh to the people. So the customs of Moses, when I customarily, okay, I customarily go to work 5 days a week. I customarily, I don't really know what my customs are now I think about it, but you have customs. You have customs, things that you do every day, and a lot of them are cultural. Okay, but these are the customs of Moses. Okay, notice how he didn't say customs of the Jews. He says customs of Moses. Okay, so the false accusation against Stephen is that he said that Yahshua, Jesus, was teaching against the customs of Moses. Think about that logically. It's a false accusation, which means that Yahshua did not teach against the customs of Moses. And we know that because you read the red letters, nowhere does he ever anywhere say anything negative about the actual commandments given to Moses. It's always against the traditions of the elders, the added commandments by the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Okay? So Paul comes on the scene. Now, you start with the book of Acts. You read all through the book of Acts. He's meeting with believers on the Sabbath. He's making a point as he's going on his missionary journeys around Europe and Asia to get back to Jerusalem in time for the feast days. Why? Because as an Israelite man, he is required by Torah to present himself in Jerusalem 3 times a year for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, for the Feast of Shavuot or Pentecost, the Feast of Weeks, and for the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot. He's got to be there. Okay? So why would he hustle to get back to Jerusalem for the holy days if he knew he didn't have to? It makes no sense. And you get to Acts 21, and the elders in Jerusalem tell him, you know, everybody's saying that you're teaching the Gentiles not to keep the law. We know that's bogus. Okay, so to prove it, we want you to go with these 4 guys who took a Nazirite vow and help them with their vow. Pay for it. So what's he doing when he's paying for it? He's paying for the animals. He's purchasing the animals that are going to be sacrificed for this. Wait a minute. Animal sacrifice, this is after Christ died. And here Paul is participating in animal sacrifice at the temple to fulfill a commandment, the Nazirite vow. Why? To prove to the people that he is actually zealous for the Torah, the law. Okay? It's like he's being accused of preaching lawlessness, and to say, hey guys, whoa. I'm going to show you that I'm not against the law by keeping the law, by obeying a commandment. Why would he do that if the law was done away with? He could have just said, whoa, hold up, guys. Why are you having me do this? You guys know that when Christ died, the law was done away with. This is stupid. But he didn't. Okay? So you're only going to be able to accept that if you can take off the cultural blinders. Okay? Our culture is a Catholic or Protestant culture. You know, that's basically the 2 branches that influence us as believers in Christ. Okay? So both of those branches say that the Torah was done away with. Even though Yahshua, Christ, said in Matthew 5, okay, the very first sermon he makes in his ministry, okay, this is his first address to the people. He gives the Beatitudes first, okay? He gives the blessed are the peacekeepers, etc. Almost immediately, he comes right out and says, don't think that I came to abolish the Torah. Why would he say that? He knows what he's going to do. He knows that he's about to spend the next, year and a half, 3.5 years, however long, telling people not to keep certain commandments. Okay? When he goes to the wedding at Cana and he turns the water into wine, okay? We make jokes about that, okay? About the preacher who gets pulled over and, he's got wine in his, the water must have turned to wine or whatever, okay? We make jokes about it. But it's significant because if you understand the ritual purity laws that were imposed upon the people by the Pharisees and or Sadducees at that time, okay, in order to drink water out of those vessels, they had to be ritually purified along a certain set of guidelines that were dictated by the clergy. Okay, so they had, I don't know specifically what that ritual was. It probably involved certain specific prayers and different things like that. But they had to be done a certain way if you were going to carry water in them. The moment Yahshua turns that water into wine, he defiles those basins. He could, because he just basically reverses what they did, you know, and he's tweaking them. He's saying, look at all the trouble you guys went through to purify these vessels with your little rituals and stuff, and I just messed that up. Okay, he's messing with them. He really is. Okay, now if that had been an actual Torah commandment, he would have sinned. Because what does John tell us in 1 John 3? He tells us that sin is violation or transgression of the Torah, of the law. Okay? He would have violated the law and been sinful, and therefore he cannot be a sinless sacrifice to atone for our sins. He can't go before us as our high priest at that point sinless. Okay? Because every high priest that's human has his own sins that he has to atone for first on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement. He has to atone. When Aaron went on the Day of Atonement to atone for the people, he had to atone for himself first. Yahshua did not have to do that because he had no sin to atone for. Okay? So, but if this was a legitimate thing, yeah, he would have been in sin. And therefore he can't be our Messiah. Okay, so right there, he's attacking their traditions, but not the actual written commandment given to Moses on Sinai. Okay? And you can go example after example after example, healing on the Sabbath, picking the grain out of the field on the Sabbath, all these different things that they were accusing him of breaking the law and teaching his disciples to break the law, but he wasn't breaking the law. You read the Torah, you read those first 5 books, you're not going to find anything like that in there that says you can't do that. Okay? So, but that's what our culture teaches us. Our Christian culture teaches us that the law was done away with. Okay, we're under grace exclusively. Okay, and what I'm saying is that we have to be honest with ourselves about that. We have to be willing to admit that our beliefs are a product of our culture. They just are. Very few of us came to our beliefs in a vacuum. Very few of us, I mean, I'm gonna make an extreme example here to prove a point, okay? If I'm born on a desert island out in the middle of nowhere, and let's say my parents die immediately, whatever, and I'm just left as a child to grow up on this desert island, okay? And I have no belief system whatsoever because I'm not in contact with anyone. Every day is a day-to-day just struggle to survive. That's my culture. Okay. Now, am I going to believe in Yahweh? Am I going to believe in Christ? Am I going to believe in Allah or Buddha or, I mean, you name it? What's my belief system going to be? None of the above, because I'm not going to have any cultural context to have those beliefs. I'm not going to have anyone telling me that I should have those beliefs. I'm not going to have parents around to teach me those beliefs. So I'm not going to believe those things. So the inverse is true. When we are in a culture that does all of the above and teaches us all those things, of course we're going to believe those things. And when you read the Barna polls that come out periodically, that they talk about the numbers, the stats about people, you know, as they mature, the millennials and whatnot. We have more and more young people who are leaving Christianity. They're going towards sorcery, witchcraft, New Age religions, Druidism, things like that, Wicca, or they're going agnostic, or they're going atheist. Why? Why? In a lot of the polls, they asked him that. And the basic answer is they find something that's not right with Christian doctrine that they've been taught, and it causes them to question their belief system. And so they basically just throw it out. Okay. So, I mean, Bart Erdman, I'll throw him as an example. He used to be I'm probably going to get his backstory wrong. So hopefully I'm not butchering it too much. But as I recall, he was raised in a Christian household as a believer, went to some type of a seminary. And as he studied, he started to notice things about Paul's letters that kind of made him think, wait a minute, something's not quite right here. And I haven't read any of his books, like Misquoting Jesus or anything like that. But I mean, I can think of one, for example, that to me, if you look at only these two, and I posted these on Facebook the other day, if you put like in Romans, okay, Paul talks about how the law is good and just and righteous. Okay. He talks about how not the hearers of the law are justified, but the doers of the law are justified. Wait a minute. Whoa, 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 whoa. The doers of the law are justified. But then in Galatians, he says the opposite. And he says that basically, if you keep the law, you fall from grace. So that's an apparent contradiction. Okay, so we have possible scenarios here. One, well, I think there's three basically as far as I can tell. One, Paul is just senile, he's schizophrenic. He says one thing to one group and forgets that he said that, and so he contradicts himself with the next group. Well, if that's the case, you can't put any stock in Paul. You can't believe what he says. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay. B, you have multiple people writing these letters claiming to be Paul. You have some imposters. Okay. Maybe there is no Paul. Okay. Maybe there's two Pauls. There's a real Paul and there's somebody posing as Paul. So that's why you get the two different perspectives. Or my position is that it's an audience relevance issue. The contradictions come into play, the seeming contradictions, because we don't understand who he's talking to and what he's addressing with that specific audience. Okay? Because all through Romans, he's talking about the virtues of the law, the commandments. He's talking about how they're good. But you read Galatians, woo, man, you don't want to keep the Torah after you read Galatians. You read Galatians, man, I ain't keeping those commandments. Not for me. Nope. Well, which is it? You know? So you have to be able to look at that stuff critically. And we have to be willing to audit our beliefs and say, why do I believe that the Torah is done away with based on what Paul wrote in Galatians, but I'm not willing to believe that I should be keeping the Torah and that it's for my benefit based on what he said in Romans? Because it's a cultural expectation. Now, if we track this back all the way back to the apostolic age, okay? Now, who killed Jesus? Okay? Literally, it was the Jews. Okay? Now, that's a technicality. Okay? Who else was in on it? The Romans were in on it because the Jews did it under the auspices of the Roman political system, the Roman justice system, right? Pontius Pilate, they even went up to Herod. Okay? So we know theologically that it goes much deeper than that. We killed him. We all killed him because if we were obeying Yahweh's commandments, if we were actually doing what he told us to do in the first place from Mount Sinai, we would not be sinning. There would be no sin to atone for, and nobody would have needed to kill him. He would not have needed to die. Okay? So all of us killed him. Okay? not just the Jews. Yes, technically, literally, they did. But you can't place that squarely at their feet. Okay? But that's what happened in the early apostolic time period. You had a backlash, and you can look this up online. You can do the history. Okay, you can look at the history. You can see that there was a backlash against the Jews by Christians because they killed Jesus. And it became this attitude amongst early Christians that those rotten Jews, they killed Jesus. Ugh! And it morphed into this thing where why on earth would we want to do anything that they do? They're the scum of the earth. They're evil. They killed Jesus. So they keep the Sabbath. We're not going to keep the Sabbath. They eat clean. We're going to eat whatever we want. You know, they keep Passover. We're going to do the spring fertility rites. We're going to worship Astari. Okay, that's what happened. It's historical fact. It was a backlash against the Jews that basically caused this concept to creep in to legitimate Christianity, people who legitimately follow Christ and follow means, do what I do, right? Okay. Well, he kept the Sabbath, he ate clean, he did all that stuff. Or otherwise he would not have been sinless. So it became this anti-Jew thing. Notice how I'm not saying anti-Semitic, because I think anti-Semitic is a dumb term, because there are so many ethnic groups that are Semitic. The Arabs are Semitic. So to say that Muslims and Arabs are anti-Semitic because they don't like the Jews is stupid, because they are Semitic. They're Semites. They're descendants of Shem. They came from Ishmael, who was a descendant of Abraham, who was a descendant of Shem. They're Semites. They're anti-Jew. They're not anti-Semites. That's technicality. I whatever. So the early church became anti-Jew. And so they did things to differentiate themselves from the Jews. Okay. And that's where the culture eventually morphed and led into, was this anti-Jewish thing where we're not going to do things like they do because they're evil. They killed the Messiah. They killed Jesus. Okay. Why on earth would we want to be like them? Okay. So 2,000 years later, give or take, that's where we're at. Okay. When I first started doing this, when I first started keeping Sabbath, when I first started eating clean, when I would go in a restaurant and say, "Is there any bacon in the salad? I don't want any bacon in my salad. Are you Jewish?" When I started wearing tassels, which is a commandment, "Are you Jewish? Did you go Hasidic?" No. Okay, because Christians associate keeping the commandments with Judaism. Okay, and that's a partially valid association because the Jews generally do keep the commandments, but they have gone the opposite way of Christianity. Christianity, he said, we're not going to keep any of the commandments because Jesus did away with them. The Jews have said, we're going to keep the commandments, but we're going to dictate how we do it. Okay, we have the right to tweak the commandments and to adjust them to our needs and our cultural time frames and our convenience, basically. Well, either way, you're wrong. His commandments are forever. They're eternal. There's one law and one lawgiver, and it ain't us. We're not the lawgiver. We have no right, none of us, not even Paul, has the right or the authority to abrogate, modify, change, adapt any of Yahweh's holy commandments. None of us do. Okay? So I feel like I've kind of gone on kind of a sweeping tangent here. Okay? So I'm going to try to rein it back in. We're not going to come to any of these conclusions unless we're willing to audit our beliefs. Okay, so my challenge to you, if you're watching this, is to examine yourself. Okay, why do I believe that I can eat bacon. That sounds dumb. I mean, we're in America. You know, bacon everywhere. Bacon on the billboards, bacon memes on Facebook, bacon is everywhere. Why do I believe that I can eat bacon when I can read in Leviticus chapter 11, I believe, that pork, pig, swine is unclean and I am forbidden to eat it? Okay. Why do I believe that? Why do I believe that I should be keeping Christmas in December? It's not in the Bible. Yes, Jesus was born in the Bible, but nowhere does it say he was born on December 25th. Nowhere does it say it was snowing outside like we see in the movies and the nativity scenes. Nowhere do we see that there were three wise men. The wise men came and they brought three gifts, but it doesn't say there were three. And if you read the text logically and analytically, he was a toddler by the time they got there. They didn't get there on his birthday, on his very first birthday. But we believe those things because that's what we're told. That's what we're taught in churches. That's what we see in the movies. That's what we see as we drive down Broadway on the different storefront nativity scenes or wherever. It's everywhere. So we believe it. Okay. Why do we believe in keeping Easter over Passover? Jesus kept Passover. His disciples kept Passover. They were doing Passover in the book of Acts. Okay. So, but why are we doing Easter? Easter's not in the Bible. In the King James, the word Easter is there once in the book of Acts. But if you look in the Strongs, you see that that word is not Easter. It's actually Passover. Okay. So why are we keeping Easter? Well, this generation, this current generation, is keeping it because the previous generation told us to. And the previous generation from them told them to. It only takes one generation to mess it up for everyone. You go back and you look in Exodus, okay, and all the way up to Joshua. One generation, that generation that fell in the wilderness, the unfaithful generation, messed it up. Okay, you had a faithful generation with Joshua. Once they died, nope, we're back to the drawing board. They messed it up again. Read the book of Judges. You got a righteous judge that comes up, leads the people back to righteousness. He dies. They fall completely off the bandwagon again, back into idolatry and everything they want to do. And then, you know, they're conquered by their enemies. Yahweh sends another judge, gets them back on track. He dies, right back off the bandwagon. That's how we are. Except we have stayed off the bandwagon ever since the time of Christ. We fell off the bandwagon almost right away when the wolves started to come in, just like we were told when people started to distort Paul's writings, just like Peter warned us they would. We fell right off the bandwagon and never got back on. And so people like me who are looking at our beliefs and saying, I am a human being who is imperfect, who is prone to making mistakes, who has proven to be wrong over the course of his life many times in many different ways. I'm all of a sudden 100% flawless in my beliefs based on what the Bible says. My interpretation of the Bible is 100% correct, even though everything else in my life tells me that I have a propensity to be wrong and to make mistakes. So if I have that belief, I'm either just ignorant or I'm just prideful and arrogant. You know, to think that like for me, just because I was born in the Church of Christ doesn't mean that their doctrine is correct. And if I continue to believe that, what am I saying? The only reason that Church of Christ doctrine is correct is because I was born into it. If I had not been born into that particular faith system, it would not be correct. We put ourselves as the center of our own faith universe, and we read the Bible and we basically try to twist the meaning of what we read to fit what we want it to say. And instead of conforming our lives and transforming our lives to match the word of Yahweh, we try to twist it to conform it to match what we think it should say, what we want to say. Hey, you know what? I used to eat shrimp. I used to love shrimp. Okay. You wrap some shrimp in some pork bacon, I'm all over it. Okay. I would love for that to be true. I would. I would love for the Bible to say, you know what, James? You can eat that. Go ahead, buddy. But I can't, in good faith, do that because I know that it's not true. Okay. And you can apply that across the board to lots of stuff in my life. There are things that I like doing, I want to do, but I choose not to do because the word of Yahweh tells me that's wrong. So, what are we doing when we say that grace allows us to do whatever we want and we're still going to have salvation? Okay. We're still going to be saved. We're still going to go to heaven and we can still do whatever we want. What does that say? It says that we are the center of our faith system and not the Almighty. If we're not willing to make sacrifices in our lives, to make adjustments in our lifestyle to suit Him, who are we really worshiping, whether we're doing it intentionally or not? I ask that as just a pointed question. I don't expect people to answer directly to me because who am I? I'm not your judge. But we have to all ask ourselves that question as we examine ourselves. Who am I to believe that I am 100% right? Who made me the sole arbiter of truth? Nobody. Nobody. So whoever you are, if anybody watches this, you're right on some stuff and you're wrong on some stuff. I'm right on some stuff and I'm wrong on some stuff. Okay? The calendar. I had to make a very hard decision this year on the calendar. Okay. And you say, James, the calendar, everybody knows the calendar. We have it, everybody prints it up. It's on our, I'm not talking about the calendar that we go by for business, day to day living. I'm talking about the biblical calendar. Okay. When you see that, like, say, Passover is on the 14th day of the first month, that's not January the 14th. Yahweh's year starts in the spring, the month of Abib. Okay. So we have to know when that is if we're going to keep his feasts, his holy days on his schedule. Okay. Now, when I first started doing this, I didn't really know anything. So I thought the only religious calendar there was the Hillel calendar, the Jewish calendar that everybody goes by. I went with that for a couple of years or whatever when I first started off in Texas. When I moved out to Pennsylvania, I became aware of the barley system. Okay, where we reckon the beginning of the year by the ripening of the barley. So the short of that is that the barley has to be in a spot where it can be harvested and eaten sometime during the Feast of Unleavened Bread in the first month. Okay, so since you're going off of a lunar solar calendar, 12 lunar months are shorter than 12 solar months. So every so many years, you have to add a 13th month in order to have your barley crop come in to be harvestable and eaten during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay. I became exposed to that. I believed it. It made a lot more sense. I can see stuff like that in the Bible, and I'm thinking, all right, I'll go with that. Well, recently, in the past few years, I've been very unsettled with it because I'm looking in my Bible, and I can't see anything that point blank tells me to do it that way. It's word studies, it's interpretations and assumptions on what words mean. It's contextual assumptions, and I was thinking why I don't have enough evidence here to conclusively believe that this is the correct way of reckoning the calendar. And so I did some research and I came to the conclusion that the only way I can be consistent is to go with the first full moon after the spring, or the first new moon after the spring equinox every year, because then the spring feast will always be in the spring. They'll never be before the spring, as reckoned by the turning of the seasons with the equinoxes, which is the conventional, pretty much worldwide way of reckoning the seasons. Okay. And it's not a bulletproof position. It's just not. There's no place in the scripture that tells you to do that point blank either. But in my mind, thinking logically, it's the system that has the least amount of holes in it. So for at least for now, that's what I've chosen to go with for my family. Now, that's not to say that barley is wrong. Maybe barley is right. I don't know. Maybe the Jubilees Enoch calendar that we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls is correct. I don't think it is, but maybe it is. But my point is, I don't have enough concrete evidence on the calendar to tell you that I am 100% correct in my understanding of it. And it's humbling to say that, because I wish I could tell you, yeah, of course I'm right, and if you don't believe that, well, let me teach you why. Let me teach you the truth, but I can't do that. I can't teach the calendar because I don't have a firm enough grasp on it based on the word. Okay. So that's just me being honest. That's just me being honest with myself and my own limitations and understanding, and making the best decision that I can make based on the evidence that I have available. And it caught me a little flack, not a ton, thankfully, but it's not um, in in the circles that I associate with, keeping the Torah keepers, Hebrew roots or whatever. Most people go by the barley method, so it put me in the minority. And the flesh certainly doesn't want to be in the minority. The flesh doesn't want to make those hard decisions and say, you know what, I'm going to go with something that I know is going to, put me in the minority. Maybe some people will, thankfully in my case, it hasn't been this case, but for some people it is, people will, not unfriend me. That sounds very Facebook, but not be my friend anymore, or shun me, or be angry at me. And that has happened for some people. And it's unfortunate because we just, anytime we think that we have got a full grasp of understanding on the word of Yahweh, we better just check ourselves. We better just stop right there and say, whoa, 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 whoa. The moment I have those thoughts that I have it all figured out, I should realize, wait a minute, that's just pride and arrogance. I don't have it all figured out. I can learn from somebody. This guy over here, who I think is wrong, I might be able to learn from him, and you watch this video, you read my post, you think I'm wrong about this whole Torah thing. Maybe I am, but could you at least be honest enough with yourself to admit that maybe I'm right about at least some of it? And, whoever's watching this, if anybody watches this, I mean, chances are I'm right about at least some of what I believe, just as you're right about some of what you believe. But figuring out where that all lines up, that's where we have to give ourselves grace, each other grace. And that's where we have to be intellectually honest about ourselves and our beliefs, and realize, I'm a human, and I'm a product of my culture. I mean, I'm a white man with a red beard from a European culture who was brought up in Christianity. The Bible is the only religious text I know. I've never read the Quran. I've never read the Vedas. I've never read any of that stuff. I have no concept of what is in those books because I wasn't raised in the cultures that believe in those books. Okay? So just knowing that ought to make me sit up and take notice that hey, I just because I come from a European culture doesn't mean that the religious system passed down from my European ancestors is right, and I mean, if you're African American, I mean, I mean, I, hopefully I won't get in trouble for saying this, but it's true. Most African Americans, who are descendant from American slaves, are Christians because they were taught Christianity by the Caucasian, the white slaveholders, and they accepted it and passed it down to their children. That's where it started. Or it might have started with European Christian missionaries over in Africa. But Christianity is not a religious system that's native to Africa. It's native to the Middle East. It's native to Israel, to the Levant, not to Africa. It was only transmitted to people of African descent through people of Middle Eastern descent and or European descent. So even then, it's a cultural thing because of the cultural mingling between the whites in America and the African Americans in Africa. Or you go to China, where the missionaries went to China and taught the Chinese Christianity, in of the sixth happiness. you know, that's not their cultural background. It's Chinese culture is not a Christian culture. Christianity is only over there because people of a Middle Eastern and or European cultural background took it there. Okay, so it is predominantly a European cultural expectation that we are Christians of some type. Okay, if we're religious. Now in this culture, yeah, be an atheist, be a witch, whatever. It's cool, right? But if you're religious and you're European, you're expected to be Christian. If you're religious and you're African American, you're expected to be Christian. It's a cultural expectation if we're honest with ourselves about it. And because we know that, we owe it to ourselves to dig into this word and first off find out, why do I believe that the Bible is the truth to begin with? Okay, so like I'm an hour and a half into this. Wow. Um, um, rather than get into what I was about to go with, I'm going to point you to another video, and I'll probably link to it on YouTube. Back in December, I went out to Enduring Hope Assembly of Yahweh out in Ohio, and Solomon Meyer gave me the opportunity to speak out there. And I made the point, I questioned basically this kind of thing, just in a different angle. Like, why, when I pick up this book, this Bible, why is this my holy book? Why does this book inform my belief system and not the Quran or the Vedas or whatever? Why? I have to be able to answer that, because I'm doing what this book says because I believe the words in this book are truth. But why do I believe the words in this book are truth? Okay. And in that talk, I go into that fairly in depth. And basically the punchline is, we don't know that this book is truth until Yahweh shows us supernaturally. Because I wasn't there at the Red Sea crossing. I wasn't there when Yahweh made the covenant with Abraham. I wasn't there when Yahshua, Jesus, was crucified. I wasn't there on Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. I wasn't there on Patmos when John got the revelation. None of us were there for any of that. So we have no eyewitnesses. We're reading these words that were written hundreds, thousands of years ago and believing that they're true. Why? Okay. And ultimately, the answer is culture. But it has to go beyond that. And that's where I believe that if these words are the truth, that's where we will begin to see the fulfillment of end times prophecy. We'll start to see the fulfillment of the book of Daniel, Revelation. Pretty much all the prophets deal with end time prophecies in some context. They might brush on it. Some are more in depth than others. When we start to see that come to pass, then we will know 100% for sure that this book is truth. Other than that, until Yahweh directly intervenes, it's culture. It really is. We're just believing this book is the truth because of our cultural upbringing. Again, if you were born in Pakistan, you would probably not believe the Bible is the truth. You would believe the Quran is. If you were born in India, you would probably not believe the Bible is the truth. You would probably go with the Vedas, okay, or the other Hindu sacred writings, okay. So really, if we're honest with ourselves, it's all about culture. So we have to examine the framework for our beliefs from a cultural standpoint. Once we come to grips with that, if we're still on board, okay, assuming that you've still decided that the Bible is the word of Yahweh and you're still going to go with it, at that point, you have to look at your belief system and all of your belief system in light of this word. How does it match up? You know, the Trinity. I'm going to get myself into trouble here on the Trinity. But the Trinity, growing up as a Christian in the Church of Christ, I was taught the Trinity. Okay. And let me define Trinity. Well, technically, it might have been like a binary thing. I don't remember the details of how they defined the Godhead, but just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to say Trinity means that Jesus is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit are all the same God. It's one God in three distinct persons. That's basically the Trinity. Now, I know you have a binary version of that, which believes that Jesus and God the Father are the same entity, one God. The Holy Spirit is not an entity, so therefore there's no Trinity, there's only two. You have modalism, which teaches that there is one God expressed three ways. Okay, so instead of having three distinct personages like you do with the Trinity, you only have one, but it's three ways. And this was explained to me a while back. Let's pretend for a moment that we're two-dimensional. We live on a sheet of paper. Okay, all we have is length and width. We don't have height. A basketball is set on that sheet of paper. What are we going to see? Maybe a dot. Okay, we'll see whatever comes in contact with that paper. That's all we're able to see because we have no height. We can't perceive height. All we can perceive is length and width. So we might see a dot where the basketball actually contacts the paper. The moment of contact, we'll see that, nothing else. Okay? And a modalist would say the dot is Jesus. The dot is the part of God that we can perceive in the flesh as mortal human beings in this reality. The rest of the basketball that we cannot see is the Father. It's the same basketball. There's only one basketball. It's the same basketball. We can only see part of it, and only part of it interacts in our realm. That's modalism, basically. Okay. Now you can see that it's very nuanced, and and there are other different flavors of that. I think my personal belief was kind of a mix of like a binary unity and modalism. I never was a true Trinitarian. I never believed that the Holy Spirit was a distinct, separate entity from the Father and the Son. So that's for me personally. When I got married, I had to come to grips with the fact that my wife was not a Trinitarian. My wife believed that Yahshua, Jesus, was created by Yahweh as his son, was the firstborn of all creation, like it says in the Bible. All things were created through him and by him, but he was not the Father. He was a distinct, separate entity from the Father and was in fact created by the Father. Now, if you're a Trinitarian, you're going like, whoa, 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 blasphemy, whoa, it'll make your head explode. And yeah, me too. Me too. I was like, okay, that's nutty. We came to a point where she was pregnant with my first child. And she approached me one day and said, you know, James, we've got to get a handle on this because we're going to have to teach him something. We're going to have to either teach him what I believe or what you believe, or maybe if we're both wrong about it, somehow we're going to have to come to some kind of agreement, because we need to teach him one thing. We don't want to teach him confusion. So I said, all right, I'll study this out. And of course, I'm thinking, I'll prove her wrong. I'll prove her wrong. I have so many proof texts for the Trinity. I will just blow her out of the water. She'll be a Trinitarian, and that's what we'll teach our kids. That happened? No, it didn't. It didn't, because when I got right down to it, and I read Yahshua's own words, where he says the Father is greater than I, when he says, your will, not mine, be done, when he tells John in Revelation that I will put my name and the name of my God on your forehead. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Jesus is God, but yet he has a God? And that's just 3 examples. There are many. Okay. I could not prove that he was also the Father. Then I had my son. We had my son. And I could see tangibly, physically, that my son was from me. In a sense, he was created by me. He could not exist without me, because if I was dead before he was conceived, he would never be conceived. So one comes first. He is in my likeness. Okay. As he gets older, I can also grasp the concept of agency, where I can ask him to do things for me. As he gets older and becomes an adult, I have the potential to put him in charge of my affairs as an agent. That was very common a while back. You had fathers and sons. The son would take over the family business. He would follow after his father. If your father was a cabinet maker, he would teach you how to make cabinets, and you would make cabinets. You would teach your kid how to make cabinets, and on down the line. Okay, so and we have the concept with monarchies, with kings. You can send an agent, a messenger out in your name. I come in the name of the King of France, and I say, surrender, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's agency. Now, I can see that now, but the only reason I was able to see that was because I was willing to actually get into this word and look at it. I could have just said, honey, you're just, no, you're just wrong. One of these days, you'll see that you're wrong, and you'll just feel ridiculous for ever believing this. And I could have just left it at that. But instead, I hunkered down, and I had to prove it or disprove it. I was forced to make a choice for the sake of my children, to either prove or disprove my beliefs about the Trinity. Okay, the deity of Yahshua. And when I say deity, I'm gonna open up a can of worms here, but I'll go ahead and clarify what I mean by that. Given what I said earlier about the angel of Yahweh, okay, about Yahshua being the angel of Yahweh and therefore being the one who actually spoke the commandments to Moses at Sinai, who actually talked to Abraham, etc., etc. Okay, he's the agent. He's the messenger of Yahweh, the one that actually brings the words of Yahweh to man. Okay, given what I said about that, going back to Genesis, Elohim said, "Let there be light." Elohim is a Hebrew word that's plural. It implies more than one. Sometimes it gets translated as gods, plural. Okay, when it's talking about Yahweh, it always gets translated as singular, but it's a plural word. So there are at least 2 beings present at creation in Genesis. Okay, there's at least 2. Now, let us make man in our own image. Again, there's at least 2 beings there speaking. Okay, you get to Sodom and Gomorrah. Yahweh on earth rained down fire from Yahweh in heaven. There's two Yahwehs. What does Yahweh mean? Basically means eternal. Okay? So the way I explain this to my kids, I use geometry. And I say, Yahweh the Father is eternal, like a line. Okay, a line goes on forever, infinitely, in both directions. It has no beginning and it has no end. Okay? Yahshua is eternal. Christ, Jesus is eternal. But he's eternal like a ray. A ray has a definite origin point, but it extends on forever in one direction. So it has a beginning, but it has no end. Still eternal. Okay? Now, if I put both of those on a sheet of paper, and then I put the creation of the earth somewhere, say, to the right, okay? Both of those beings, represented by a line and a ray, are going to pre-exist the creation of the earth and therefore human beings. So you can say that they're both pre-existent, okay? Jesus, Yahshua, is pre-existent. He is Elohim. The word Elohim gets translated in English as God. So you can say that Jesus or Yahshua is God. You can say he is eternal. You can say he is pre-existent. All those things are correct. They're all true. Okay? Now, where I differ from that is saying that he is the Father, because he's clearly not the Father. He's the Son. Okay? The Son comes after the Father. The Son is not the Father. And if he was, in fact, his own Father, then thinking logically about his words in the New Testament, the only way I can say it is that he's schizophrenic. He's reasoning with himself about his motives and his intentions, and he wants to do one thing, but he's going to do another. And, when he says, no man knows the hour except for the Father, not even the Son. So the Father knows when he's going to return, but he doesn't. But yet he is the Father. So how could he not know when he's going to come? How can you know something and not know something? It just doesn't make any sense. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but that's to illustrate the point that that's a hard truth to accept. That was hard for me. Okay. Like I said earlier, when I went into that, I fully intended just to destroy her argument and just prove her wrong and just shut her down. Not in a mean-spirited way, but we tend to want to prove that we're right. We want to be right. And we don't like to admit that we're wrong or that we're misunderstood or misguided. It's not human nature. We have confirmation bias. We seek out people that believe the way we do. We seek out information that affirms what we already believe. You look at like these Christian movies, like Courageous and Fireproof, whatever. God's Not Dead. Most of them, the big ones, are made by Affirm Films. You watch these movies, and that's what they're doing. They're affirming what you already believe. They're not challenging you. They're not challenging your beliefs or trying to spur growth. They're just basically parroting back to you in a movie form what you already believe to be true. And because you see it on the big screen, it reinforces the concept in your mind that you're right. It affirms. So we have to get past that cycle of affirmation and get to confrontation, confront our beliefs. Am I right or am I wrong? And that's basically what I'm trying to say almost 2 hours later. So I didn't mean for it to go that long. But yeah, I mean, it's not enough to just say, I am a Baptist, I am a Methodist, I am a Presbyterian. This is what I believe, and it's right, and I don't question it. You're a robot at that point. Really, you're an automaton. You're a minion. You're just somebody following along in lockstep agreement somebody who came before you and told you a certain set of programming. You're really, you know, and if you do this and you audit your beliefs and you end up somehow affirming your beliefs, hey, at least you took the steps to make sure that what you believed is true, as opposed to just believing it based on the fact that that's what you've always believed. You know, Christianity is not the truth just because I'm a white man of European descent and most Europeans are Christian. That does not make Christianity truth. You know, it, if I'm an Arab born in an Arab culture, that doesn't make the Quran the truth. I mean, culture does not define the truth of the Most High. It does not. It cannot guide our theology. It can't. It can't. Now, our theology can guide our culture, and it did at one point. But we're so far removed from that point. It's we can't even see it in the rearview mirror. It's gone. It's in the distant past. We're basically starting fresh at this point. I mean, back in the 70s, you had scholars coming out with a new, what was it, the new perspective on Paul. Basically, they couldn't get around it anymore that Paul was keeping the Torah. What? These are Christian scholars, mainstream Christian scholars in the seminaries and stuff, started to come to grips with the fact that Jesus was a Jew and he kept the Torah, and his disciples kept the Torah, and Paul kept the Torah. So, then you have terms that are, put out there like Pauline Christianity. The fact that you have to describe a certain flavor of Christianity as Pauline from Paul tells you that his influence on Christianity is big enough to merit its own distinction. Original Christianity, as we see it in the Bible, was Jews to start who were keeping the Torah and came to accept that Yahshua or Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of Yahweh. That was the only thing that changed for them. They did not stop keeping the Torah just because they believed in Yahshua or Jesus. They continued to keep the Torah while they believed in him. When the Gentiles came along, okay, Gentiles, the nations, now this was a mixture of other Israelites from the other tribes who had gone into exile, who were kind of rediscovering their roots. And it was also a mix of other ethnic groups from other religious cultures who had no concept of the Tanakh, the Old Testament. They had no concept of the Hebrew scriptures. They had no concept of Yahweh. They had no concept of the Torah. All they knew is that they were hearing about Yahshua or Jesus, and the message resonated with them. And so that's why in the Council of Jerusalem, the whole thing was, how can we get these guys in the door? Okay? Yeah, like some of the Jews were saying, you guys have to be circumcised before you can be saved. Whoa, 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 whoa. Where does it say that anywhere? It doesn't. Circumcision is a commandment, but we're talking about ultimate salvation here. Okay? So the council basically said, do these four things, these four basic things, like abstain from idolatry, abstain from food eating with blood, fornication. I forget what the fourth one is offhand. Basically, clean up a little bit. Just do some basic stuff here to kind of clean up a little bit. Then we'll let you in, to the church, to the synagogue at the time was the church, the church building. And then they can hear the word of Moses. So the ultimate goal was to get them in the synagogue so they could hear the word of Moses, but they need to clean up a little bit first. It was never about do these four things and only these four things because you're a Gentile and you're not required to do anything else. No, that was not the intent. And if you read it in context, it's clear. I mean, to put it in modern terms, some churches would do this. but most churches would not. A prostitute, who's used to just day-to-day existence, um, wearing almost nothing, very little to the imagination, maybe drinks a lot, liquor on the breath all day long, maybe smells like marijuana because they smoke pot, you know, clean up from that a little bit before you come to services, please. You put some clothes on. Don't come in here smelling like, reefer and Jack Daniels, please. I mean, we want to help you. We want to lead you. We want to help you get right, and we want to help you to find Christ, but we can't really let you in this building like this. Okay. It's just clean up a little bit. It's all we're asking. Tidy up a little bit. Just do this little thing. Then you can come in and we'll teach you the rest of it. We'll give you the full gospel. Okay. But if you're going to come into the sanctuary, okay, then we have to, we have to tighten up a little bit. That's all they were saying. They weren't saying, the whole point was to get in the synagogue. What do these guys have to do to get in the synagogue so they can learn the rest of it? That's all it was. Modern churches, a lot of them wouldn't care. Yeah, sure, come in naked. Come in with a joint, come in with a tall boy, of course, or whatever, like whatever. Everybody's welcome, but when you do that, there's no holiness, there's just not. And it's one thing to welcome everybody in, to teach them the truth, regardless of where they're at or regardless of their background. I am 100% for that. But there has to be a degree of holiness in our sanctuaries, and that's all they were going for. Okay, with the Council of Jerusalem. So, but you're not going to come to grips with that if you just go along with what you were told by your pastors and your clergy and your commentaries and this, that, and the other. So the people who came up with the new perspective on Paul were honest enough intellectually to look at that and say, that's all this was. That's all Paul was. He was a Torah observant Jew, technically from Benjamin. Benjamin was lumped in with the tribe, with the southern house of Judah, and therefore called Jews. It's a technicality, but you're not going to see any of that unless you're willing to look in the first place. And that's my whole point. You have to be willing to look. You have to be willing to examine your beliefs and not trust in your own inerrancy, because we are not the Almighty. We're just not. We build ourselves up as the Almighty in our minds, in our ego, but we're not. So I'm just going to leave you with that, and hope that this resonates with somebody. My goal is not to convert anyone over to my way of thinking, because to say that I'm going to convince you that everything I believe is right goes against everything I just said, because I can guarantee you there is something in my belief system that is incorrect. I don't know what it is, because just like you, I believe that everything I believe is correct. Why would I believe it if I didn't think it was true? Why am I going to intentionally believe something that I believe to be false? It makes no sense. By default, our beliefs are all truth in our minds. So all I'm trying to do is get you to, in my Facebook posts, in this stuff, I'm just trying to get you to read your Bibles, figure out why you believe them, what you believe in them, where did your beliefs come from, are they true, are they false? If they're false, let's find the right ones, let's work towards the truth. And if I can do anything to help anyone, let me know. I mean, I'm an open book. I am me on Facebook, post in the comments, whatever I can do, just to help open your mind. And I don't consider myself a teacher, so I'm not really geared towards teaching anybody anything. But I am a watchman, just in Ezekiel 33. I can see sin in the camp, and I can see that there's a problem, and I'm working towards helping that problem. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I have an ultimate solution for it, but I can't just sit back and not pitch in and try to help. So yeah, if that's where you're at, if any of this resonates with you, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to discuss it with you and walk along with you in unity, because I want to make it clear again, I am not against Christianity. If you consider yourself a Christian, no matter what denomination, I consider you a brother or a sister. I am not writing you off. I'm not saying you're an idiot. I'm not saying you're a moron. I'm not saying you're anything. Okay. All I'm saying is that there are parts of your belief system that I have seen over the years, and many others have as well, independently on their own, have seen over the years that are incorrect and need to be addressed. That's all I'm saying, guys. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying you're I'm not saying if you don't keep the Sabbath, I'm not saying if you like a little pork bacon on your burger that you're going to burn hellfire forever. I don't believe that. I don't. Okay, I'm not condemning you to hell if you choose not to keep the Torah. The reality is, just by virtue of being a decent Christian and a decent human being, you're keeping most of the Torah on a daily basis anyway, without even thinking about it. I use the example sometimes of fence posts, property posts, boundary markers. That's a commandment in the Torah. Moving your property marker is a sin. You know, if I have a fence between me and my neighbor that's right on the property line, and I move that fence 6 foot over to my neighbor's side, what have I done? I've extended my property by 6 feet. Okay. I've stolen some of his property. How many of you are going to go out and do that? Most everybody who identifies as a believer in Christ does not do that. So that's just because you're a decent human being. Decent people don't do that. So you're doing most of the commandments anyway, just by being a good person. It's the main ones are the holy days, like Passover, unleavened bread, Shavuot, Pentecost. If you're a Pentecostal and you're not keeping Pentecost, where's the disconnect there? Shavuot, Day of Atonement, Feast of Trumpets, weekly Sabbath. Okay, Christians don't do those. The clean food laws, Christians don't do those unless it's for some ancillary health benefit, like a shellfish allergy or something like that. The tassels. Not even all the Hebrew roots people wear tassels. Not everybody believes in wearing tassels, even though it specifically says to. Okay, and then what's the other one? Uh, there's four: the feast days, the clean food, the Sabbath, and yeah. Well, I guess I was splitting the Sabbath and the feast days separately. But that's basically it. If you're a Christian, instead of keeping those holy days I just mentioned, you're doing stuff like Easter, Halloween, Christmas, things like that instead. Will it hurt you to switch over and do the ones that are in the Bible? No. Okay. Will it hurt you to switch from Sunday over to Saturday? No. Will it kill you to give up pork bacon and shrimp? No. I did, and I'm still here. I'm happy. I'm snug as a bug in a rug. You know, I mean, it's just something that you do, and you live with it, and you make it your lifestyle. And it's those things. And you can get into other stuff, like the names. This is secondary. I think, to me, but our Creator has a name. Yod He Wah in the Hebrew, it says it almost 7,000 times. In your Bibles, in your English Bibles, it'll probably say Lord in all caps. That comes from, that's to signify Yahweh, Yod He Wah He. He has a name. Jesus is not a Hebrew word. So his Hebrew parents would not have named him Jesus. That's just logic. The letter J was never a part of the Hebrew alphabet, you know? So Jesus was an impossibility. It never could have been his name, you know? His name in the Hebrew is spelled exactly the same as what we translate as Joshua. You know, Yod He Shin Ein, uh, I messed it up. Yod He Wah Shin Ein, okay, in the Hebrew. And I pronounce that Yahshua. There's debate on how to do it. Some people say Yeshua, some people say Yehoshua, whatever, but it's certainly not Jesus, you know? Now that might, freak you out, and that might just, push your buttons, but it's a fact. And I can't get my brain around why it's such a big deal to just switch over to the truth. You know, if facts tell you that his name could not possibly have been Jesus, then why continue on insisting calling him by that name? I don't understand. You know, I just it doesn't make sense to me. And with Yahweh, you're calling him Lord or God. Those are titles. They're valid titles. He is our Lord. He is our God. But when we see news reports, on the news where you have people saying Allah Akbar, how do they typically translate it? God is great. Well, who? Oh, so they're talking about Yahweh? They're talking about the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? No, they're not. They're talking about Allah. So just calling our God God is not sufficient to identify him. Now, if you put qualifiers on that and say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, okay, because Allah is not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You're making a distinction between other gods. You're doing it with titles and qualifiers, but you're still making that distinction. But nothing gets right down to it as well as saying the name, calling him by his name. I mean, if you say, hey, bald guy with a red beard and a Fender T-shirt on, well, I'll know that's me, you know. But if you say, hey, James, I'll know that's me. Boom, much faster. I can't snap. Probably didn't hear anything when I snapped. It's how it is. That's his name. He told Moses it's his memorial name for all generations. He didn't say for all generations of the Jews or for all generations of the Israelite kingdom on earth until it was destroyed. For all generations, that includes us. It's still his memorial name. It's still important to him. But you're not going to come to grips with that if you're just going along with what you've been told from the pulpit and the commentaries and the movies, etc., etc., etc. So audit your faith. Don't be afraid to take a good hard look. Dig in deep. It hurts. I can tell you from personal experience, it's a wounding experience. It hurts. It's painful. You feel there's friction with your family members and friends. Thankfully, with my family, they were very tolerant. They were very gracious. I didn't have a ton of friction with them, like is the case with some people, and I'm grateful for that. Some families are torn apart over this. Some families have a person who decides they're going to walk this path, and the whole family just blows up. They don't speak to each other. They're shunned. They're outcast. They're put out of the will. It's terrible, and it's terrible that it comes to that for some people. But at the same time, truth has to trump everything else. What does Yahshua say? Jesus, he says, you know, you have to, and I'm paraphrasing, you have to love me more than you love your mother and father, your brother and sister. You have to, he has to go first. He's the way, the truth, and the life. He just is. And so truth, he's not the way, the opinion, and the life. He's not the way, the interpretation, and the life. He's not the way, the feeling, the emotion in the life. He's not the way, the paradigm in the life. No, he's the way, the truth, and the life. The truth, not a truth, the truth. So dig in there, examine your beliefs, and find the truth. Work with me, work with your neighbor, work with your family. Let's all work on this to find the truth together as the family of the Most High. But we're not going to do that unless we can get over ourselves, humble ourselves, put the egos aside, put the pride aside, and own up to the fact that we're human and we're fallible and we're wrong all the time. And yes, it is possible that our theology could have holes in it and that need to be filled. So, with that said, I just want to encourage you that it's Shavuot now. It has been since sundown. There's different ways of reckoning. I mentioned calendar earlier. There's different ways of reckoning when Pentecost is Shavuot, depending on how you interpret the calendar. The way I interpret it, and a lot of other people today, that's now Sunday, would be considered Pentecost or Shavuot. So um, I'm going to say happy Shavuot, happy Pentecost, whether you're observing it or not. Um, and I just hope that Yahweh blesses you. I hope that the Son Yahshua blesses you, and I hope that you're able to do that dig down deep, that audit, and come out on top. And just blessings to you, and hallelujah.